Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Families Together in New York State's Developmental Disabilities Town Hall. If anyone who's attended any of our town halls in the past knows that we have different town halls depending on the different departments and the different issues that face our families and young people here in New York State. I'm Paige Pierce. I'm the CEO at Families Together. I'm thrilled today to be able to welcome our commissioner from the Office of Developmental Disabilities, Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities, Commissioner Willow Bear, and also with us is Senator Pat Fahey's office. The two of them are going to answer questions and be on a panel with ambassadors, parents, and young people with lived experience in the developmental disabilities world. And we're thrilled to have you here today. I'm here just really to welcome everyone and to remind you that we have other town halls coming up this Friday. We have one on mental health and substance use disorder. And you can check our website at any time or look at our Facebook page to see the schedule and the link and how to register. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Kim Kaiser, who is a parent and also is going to be the moderator for today. Kim?
Thank you, Paige. Really happy to be here. I'm a parent of a child on the spectrum. I'm also a disabilities advocate, and I'm really anxious to hear what our ambassadors have to say today. I do want to remind everybody that the ambassadors have roughly 3 minutes to pose their questions, and then we will be doing a round robin with our guest, Commissioner Bear, and with Senator Fahey's office for responses. So without further ado, let us get started. And we are going to start today with Ms. Donna Hall. Donna, would you like to unmute and introduce yourself?
Good morning. Hi, my name is Donna Hall, and I'm from Long Island. I'm a parent and aunt who recently gained guardianship of my nephew to keep him out of the child welfare system. I'm also a parent advocate with a number of organizations in Long Island. As I navigate the system, legally bound to support those with developmental disabilities, there are a number of challenges families face. My question is, what immediate services are available for students aging out of high school, and how can agencies like OPWDD and Access VR work more closely with parents to prevent gaps in services? Also, what measures are in place to reduce wait time for services and support for families caring for loved ones with developmental disabilities, especially those with limited financial means in underserved communities in New York State? Thank you.
So do I just jump in? Sorry, this is my first. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. So I'm Willow Bear. I'm the commissioner of the New York State Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. Donna, there was so much packed into those questions. I will attempt to try to hit all of the points that you made, and I have other members of my team here if they need to jump in because I missed something important. So you talked first about that transition between high school and sort of adult life, which is a really hard time for anyone, right? And when you add on a developmental disability or other type of disability into that mix, it becomes even more complicated. So you asked about Access VR. We don't run Access VR, so I'm not even going to try to touch on that, but we do communicate with the leadership of Access VR to try to make sure that the gaps between the two systems are as non-existent as we can. We do at our regional office and central office level a lot of work reaching out to school districts, liaising with the education system, trying to ensure that through the work with our transition planners and people's care managers, that those young adults really are ready to move to that next stage of life. where you're moving from a service system that is predominantly, although not entirely, provided by the education system to one that, takes the education system completely out of your life, right? So again, that is a giant transition. Our transition coordinators really encourage school systems and families, young adults, to start that planning process 3 years before graduation, whether that's at a regular Regents diploma or whether you're staying in your education system until you're 22, which we know you now have the legal right to do. That transition planning really should start 3 years ahead of time to make sure that we have a really robust plan to move that young adult into the next stage of life, whether that's pursuing a career or whether that's pursuing ongoing education. So we have local school transition coordinators at all of our regional offices who work all day, every day with school districts to try to make sure that they have the knowledge they need about what supports and services are available. They attend transition fairs at schools so that they can interact directly with families and other members of the education department and the school district to really make sure that everybody understands what the process is and what's available. Alexis dropped into the chat, if folks have access to that, a set of resources that's really, really helpful. This is a transition toolkit that we developed. It provides information on eligibility, on our front door process, which is what we refer to of the process of going through eligibility, learning about our system, learning what tools are out there and how to become supported by OPWDD. So that link is in the chat. It also, I think, provides resources and information about our family support services. So these are services that families and people with disabilities can access before they're even eligible for our full waiver, our full sort of heavy duty support. There's information in there about employment opportunities for students transitioning out of school and how to get connected with a care manager so we can really move from that IEP planning to a life planning, which is what we call the system here. In terms of that educational transition, Alexis, I just wanted to give you a moment if there was something important that I missed that you wanted to add with folks.
No, I think you did great.
All right, so I saw that you dropped a link. Someone said that they don't see the link. So let's make sure we just send it, I guess, to everyone instead of to panelists.
Yeah, I was only able to share it with the hosts and panelists, so I'm sorry about that. I don't know if anybody's able to maybe share it with folks afterwards, but I just didn't want to forget about the resource.
Yeah, Khadijah can share it with the attendees.
Perfect. We will get that sent to everybody. Don, I think you also asked about sort of what else we're doing to make sure that those wait times aren't as lengthy for people, if I'm recalling that part of the question. Just like any sort of robust government set of services, there are wait times sometimes to get through eligibility processes, to really do that person-centered look at what somebody might benefit from, how we can identify based on their desires and strengths and geographic area, right, the right set of services, and that can take some time. We do have a 120-day requirement in terms of processing eligibility, but in a lot of ways, even though that can be a frustrating process, that's sort of the easy first piece, right? And then there's all of the person-centered planning that goes on to make sure we're lining up all of those other pieces I mentioned, where you live, what your strengths are, what your needs are, what you're interested in doing for your life, right? And so that can take some time to match those services up. And again, that's why we have some of those other what's called family support services to really build in some additional support around the edges while we get through that process. We as a system are investing billions of dollars every year, even in sort of harder financial times. This agency and this governor continue to up the investment each year in terms of service dollars and money for our nonprofits so that they can pay higher wages, so they can recruit staff. So we are all out supporting every way we can think of to really build up that workforce, build up those nonprofits, make sure services are available as well as we can. Part of your question, if I recall correctly, was about underserved areas of New York State. We absolutely have discovered, agree, acknowledge, right, that there, as it exists now, and just like any system, there is certainly inequities in terms of how easy it is to access services, and there are certainly underserved areas and underserved communities throughout the state. We have an entire action plan in place to address our ability as a system to be more responsive to those communities and those underserved populations, our marginalized communities, right? So we are any number of initiatives in place to try to make sure that as a system, we are both sustainable, but absolutely equitably distributed. So our strategic plan, sorry, Monday morning, I haven't had enough coffee, outlines a lot of those efforts as well. And again, I don't know if Rachel or Alexis on my team have anything to add.
Just one thing on the, with limited financial means, I just wanted to put an exclamation point on family support services, family reimbursement program, and that there are direct purchasing options available, especially if it would provide a hardship or somebody can't even front that. Direct purchase is always an option. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. It's something that kind of gets lost in the sauce sometimes. Also with self-direction, there are opportunities for direct purchase to happen through the fiscal intermediary, especially on those areas that would be very difficult to front load a huge amount of cash and wait for that to be reimbursed. We recognize that and have built that into both of those models. That's all.
If I could just chime in here, I think that the commissioner gave us a really great overview of what the LPWDD system's offering. I can speak a little bit to what goes on with Access VR, if that might be helpful, Donna. Right now, I think the Department of Ed does a pretty good job offering these vocational rehab services to individual disabilities, including, performing assessments, career counseling, job placement and retention services. Specifically during that transition period, one thing that I think that the department does that is really useful is students 14 and older are eligible for some services, including a pre-ETS, which is pre-employment transition services. It's available for students around 16 to 21, which helps with work-based learning, job exploration, post-school counseling, as well as developing those soft skills, which I think can be really critical. So there is some coordination that goes on with schools for transition planning to support independent living and employment. Obviously, there's still some challenges that exist on that front. Especially the commissioner alluded to, there are some underserved areas. I think that's something that the Department of Education is also kind of working on closing the gap on. And even truthfully, I think there is just an issue with awareness and outreach. A lot of students and families don't know about Access VR services early enough, or don't know about them at all. And I think, the earlier we're able to get those students in the door, the better chance we have of kind of preventing those gaps in service delivery. And there's also just sort of the geographic issues, especially in some of our more rural or underserved areas of the state. We just have, there can be transportation and access issues just physically, sometimes even like technology or connectivity issues in other rural or underserved areas. So that's something, we're kind of looking at how we can make some improvements, especially making sure we're having earlier and more aggressive outreach for all students with developmental disabilities. I think it would be really great if we could ensure that, by age 14, all families who are within the system are kind of hearing a little bit about what's available to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was very, very informative. So moving on to our next ambassador, who is one of my favorite self-advocates, Miss Katrina Hazel.
Hi everyone, my name is Katrina. I'm a young person with cerebral palsy and I use a wheelchair for mobility. Growing up, I was often the only student in a wheelchair at my schools. So too often, that meant being left out of school trips, activities, opportunities that my peers were able to experience. These challenges inspired me to become an advocate. Today, I run a nonprofit of my own to support students with disabilities as they transition out of high school and work towards their goals. Because I believe that they shouldn't have one path to their future planning, which is like programs. Um, from my experience, I believe that disability awareness and education in public schools can be created to create more inclusive environments for students with developmental disabilities. So my question is, how can OPWDD work with schools to bring more awareness to developmental disabilities education and awareness into classrooms so that students with disabilities are celebrated, supported, and fully included?
Well, Katrina, first, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm sorry that that was your experience, but I love how you have taken that and turned it into becoming such an incredible advocate, not just for yourself, but you are an advocate across the board for everyone. And I applaud you. I think folks may know that one of the first things I did when I stepped into the role of commissioner was hire a director of advocacy and a team of peer specialists. Peer specialist is the civil service title for people who have a developmental disability, have that lived experience, but work in a state government role. Our peer specialists help advise my leadership team, advise me, review policies, sort of keep us honest and keep us focused on the mission. And that group of folks providing that internal advocacy are just absolutely transformational for all of our work. So I have such a love for that advocacy that created our entire system. So thank you, Katrina. So I love this idea of helping provide the education and the socialization sort of people with developmental disabilities in the school system. That group of peer specialists that I talked about is working right now on, they identified a real similar need in the healthcare system, a need to help educate doctors, nurses, sort of the health field, hospital systems about how to communicate and work with and serve people with developmental disabilities in that system. And they are working on an education toolkit right now for the health system. They've also talked about wanting to develop something similar for care managers, how to be really person first, person centered in working with people with developmental disabilities. But I think that this idea of sort of a similar thing on the education side is such a great idea that I will pass along to them, if that's okay, in terms of sort of the next area to do sort of that education outreach. And I have certainly also talked with our partners in the state university system about accessibility and inclusion in the higher education world, but I think starting much younger is a great addition to that. So thank you for sharing.
I think those are good ideas. Thank you.
I don't know if on behalf of Senator Fahey, who I know has a lot of background in the education system, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, definitely glad to chime in here. I think it's your question is really important because so much in state government, our mandate really is to focus on the service delivery side of things, which is really critical. But there is also this question of, what the culture in our school is and how can we ensure that we have an inclusive culture, within the public school system here. I do think that both OPWDD and SED certainly have a lot of the expertise and lived experience and training and community resources that, there is maybe something we could bring back and think a little bit more about, how we can actually, take that and build that into the culture, whether we're talking to SED and talking about how we can embed disability and culture and history into the curriculum, strengthen teacher prep, force inclusion standards, and even kind of getting a sense of what the school climate is in terms of disability acceptance. I think that that's something that would go a long way. So definitely really appreciate your point about obviously the service delivery component of this is the critical mission. But ultimately, I think when we talk about the person-centered model, feeling included also is a really critical element of that we need to be focusing on. So appreciate that question.
I was also thinking that it can be like a disability awareness month, like how they have it in higher education. It can be a month acknowledged for disability awareness to be celebrated, like in in public schools or throughout the education system, just like how colleges are.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Absolutely.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments? Alexis? No.
Fine. Great comment.
Great. I will put in a plug moving on when we're talking about peer specialists. I'm going to put a plug in for peer support across the board, family, peer, and youth peer support. That is a component that I believe does not exist strongly enough in the OPWDD system. So every year, Paige knows I'm going to drop it for y'all. Please take into consideration elevating. Our youth need the assistance, as do our families. And person-centered and strengths-based in system navigation is what peer support is all about. So moving on.
Kim,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I don't want to use the time the way it's not supposed to be used, but I would love to talk for like 1 minute about what that would look like and what it is when what you mean when you talk about the need for peer support.
You want to talk about it now?
It's your meeting, but
Yeah. No. Well, that there's a lot of different ideas, but Willow, I will definitely have no problem reaching out to you after this to talk about what that model can and should look like.
perfect.
Because the intersectionality is real, the comorbidities with mental health is real. So therefore, having people with lived experience would be extremely helpful. So.
Great.
Okay, so moving forward, next we have another great advocate, Olivia Williams. Olivia, you have the floor.
Hi. Um, Again, I'm a parent and advocate of an 80-year-old with autism, as well as like a supporter of my community in the capital region. My questions are, so what is well, I mean, I think we talked more about peer support, but just wanted to say families often wait up to a year from the time they connect with a care coordination organization before their child receives services. That's what I'm doing now, what I'm going through now. What steps is OPWDD taking to expand services, shorten wait times, and support children during the provisional phase for those deemed high risk and families who fall through the cracks of eligibility? Uh, do I read all the questions?
You read all the question, every part of the question that you created for this town hall.
Okay. Also, what is OPWDD doing to ensure families have access to peer support? I know that's pretty prominent, and clear guidance when navigating the system and seeking support services. Um, and what are the current allocations of funding? Where are the community-based micro grants to help expand services locally? We need an increase in numbers of providers Why are there so many, excuse me, gaps across the state?
Okay, Olivia, thank you. That I tried to write down what you were asking. It was a lot of pieces. So please let me know if I've missed something.
Yeah.
I think the first piece you talked to was about the length of time that families sometimes find they have to wait between connecting with the system and then finally having a care manager assigned to be able to receive services. So I touched on that a little bit about at the beginning, but just, to reiterate that we acknowledge, right, that there are so many pieces of building the sort of puzzle of supports together that it can take some time. And we are committed to try to shorten all of those times. A lot of that has to do with our really outdated infrastructure, which is not something that's particularly interesting to talk about, which is why we don't talk about it very much, right? But we are shifting and putting a lot of resource to shifting to a more modern world where we are processing things online instead of on paper, for example. And even just that type of a modernization will go so far to make things happen more efficiently, not just for us, but obviously our goal is for things to happen more efficiently for the people who are relying on those services. So we are fully engaged in that sort of modernization of technology. But you can't take the human out of a human service, right? We are a human service world and we are reliant on human beings showing up every day to be care managers, to deliver support. And that's why all those investments I talked about at the beginning are so vital. We've invested just on top of the cost of doing business. We've invested an additional $5 billion in the last few years just for direct care workforce and wage increases to really make sure that we have as many human beings doing the work that folks rely on to make that happen faster and for it to just be more meaningful for people, right? With CCOs in particular, with those care coordination organizations, doing a lot of in-person and virtual training for care coordination organizations about our system, put together an entire manual, hundreds of pages long. Poor Alexis and her team are engaged on these things every day, all day. To try to make sure that everyone delivering those supports and services are as knowledgeable as possible, so that we can really cut down the time that now might be calling back and forth between the agency and the care manager and submitting something, but it's missing a piece or it has the wrong information, right? We're doing everything we can to try to reduce and eliminate sort of all of that noise. So to speak, to make sure that people are getting services as fast as possible. And we talked about the family support services. This is particularly helpful for children, although not just entirely for children, but we know that that's a place where we can take some time to get really into our service system, but there are some really light touch services available locally through our family support services. So that's things like respite to provide relief to a caregiver, family training. Alexis talked about the reimbursement for certain goods and services. There are sibling services, recreational services. So those aren't always super easy to find, and we're trying to figure out how to make that easier for folks, but they are out there and they are regionally and locally based. To help with that. I'm trying to remember the next part of your question. You talked about advocacy and peer support. So I talked about our peer specialists. So that is peer support for people with developmental disabilities. We have a team of peer specialists, like I talked about, and one of the things that they do is provide peer support to other self-advocates who call and want that additional level of support. So a large part of their job is that sort of constituency work, talking to people with developmental disabilities, helping them navigate the system, helping them sort of navigate obstacles in their homes, their jobs, their service systems, to make that easier. But I am hearing the focus on also a need for family support. And that's something that we really are turning to now. I come to this system as a family member, so I have a loved one served by OPWDD. And that family piece and that family voice is so important, right? It is what holds up so much of our service system next to us and with us. And being able to really help support families, advocate, and navigate is something that I've really tried to turn my focus on in huge amount. I am traveling all over the state right now, meeting with groups of families so that I can understand sort of at the real ground level what it feels like to be kind of a customer, if you will, in the service system, and how that feels in a very rural part of New York versus in New York City, how that feels if you don't speak in English language, if you come from a different cultural background, right? So I'm meeting with all of these different groups of families so I can really, really understand how our service system is experienced. So we can do a better job of making sure that we're pushing in that advocacy, pushing in that peer support for family members. We've been working on our website to make sure that we have a family sort of support page on our website so that any family member could easily find a group. There are a lot of parent advocacy groups, right? This is family advocacy groups. This is one. So families can find groups that maybe align with what it is that they're looking for. So we're building up that resource, trying to work on education materials for families so that it's very easy for a family member to use our website to figure out what the steps are, what they can expect, where they can reach out for help. And so that's very, very important to us now. I talked a little bit about my advocacy director. So she does not have someone on her team that is focused entirely on families, but I think that that's something that we could absolutely take back and think about. And we also have the new ombudsman program this year in place. So that is a statewide independent ombudsman program. And maybe we can drop that information in the chat to get out to folks as well. That is something that the legislature and the governor put into law a couple of years ago. It is an independent organization that provides ombudsman services through a hotline and website. They do in-person and virtual support for families and for people with developmental disabilities who need some help advocating and navigating as well. So we really have, I think, all kinds of places for people, and we're really working on, like I said, pulling those all together into one easy to find place right now. Rachel, Alexis, what did I miss?
I see Senator Fahey's office has unmuted, and I hope that means that they have something to chime in.
Well, I'm happy to chime in if nobody from OPWDD has anything to add. I think the commissioner was very thorough, so I'm not sure if there's anything else folks from OPWDD want to add.
Sorry, just one thing about the CCOs, the care coordination organizations, about those entities kind of being evaluated right now. So we conducted an evaluation that's publicly available, and we're making our way through that to really understand how we can implement those findings from the evaluation and those identified gaps. So just that being the first kind of point of contact into the service system, being connected once you are enrolled with a waiver, just thought that was important to highlight. That's all.
Great. And I'll just chime in. I think obviously in terms of talking about the wait times and the availability of services, the elephant in the room is kind of the workforce issue that goes on. We've seen probably the biggest investment in the past decade over the past couple of years in the workforce. Clearly there was a period of time where I don't think there was a full recognition of the criticality of making sure that we have a consistent, stable workforce working in this space. And we're really glad to see that there's been a little bit of a course correction on that. Simply in a lot of counties, there's just not enough DSPs. And that's something that I think we're really appreciative that the office is focused on. And again, we do kind of see some of those geographic and provider distribution issues as well. We've been really pleased, as the commissioner mentioned, to see a reallocation of funds into family support services. I think, the expansion of community-based family-directed supports is really critical. Oftentimes, families are going to be the first line of support. They are going to be those strongest advocates. And I think, making those investments on the family side of things often really does it can serve as a prevention line for requiring more acute services down the line. So making those investments in families, I think, actually does help free up more resources to make investments in the workforce as well. Additionally, we really appreciate that we see significant American Rescue Plan Act funds and state budget actions have targeted DSP recruitment and retention, whether we're talking about, investing in training, giving people bonuses, having different workforce programs. And really the most critical piece, obviously, is the provider rate enhancements. I think that is going to make those positions more viable for people to stay in long term. I think being a DSP is something you should be able to make a career out of. And it shouldn't necessarily be a job that you have to do because you love doing it. And also really appreciate some of the investments that have been made, as the commissioner alluded to really enhance the services that care coordination organizations are providing. I think something that we are interested in seeing and closing some of the gaps. Right now, there is not necessarily like a statewide emergency short-term services policy, particularly for older children and families who are high risk, while eligibility of provider placement is pending. That's a gap that I think we're also interested in focusing on closing, in the coming legislative session. That's something that I think is that's going to be critical to address, and we really appreciate the office's partnership in addressing that. Hey, folks, I really appreciate the time this morning. I am going to have to jump off because I'm getting pinged that I have to get on my 10:30, but I'm glad to really chat with folks, and please follow up with us if there's anything else we can be helpful with.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Olivia, do you have something else?
Not at this time. I want to give everybody a chance, but this is a good start to opening a conversation. So thank you for all your time, commissioners, panelists, people working together.
Thanks, Olivia. All right, so moving on, we have Jennifer Sibley. Jennifer.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jennifer Sibley, and I am a parent of a 22-year-old son on the higher support needs end of the autism spectrum and also diagnosed with anxiety. I've also been a family peer advocate and a program director for the last 18 years in rural northern New York. In working in Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence counties, we often encounter situations where services are unavailable due to a lack of funding. For example, the new Cross Systems Care Program in Syracuse to assist individuals who are duly diagnosed that need crisis intervention support was underfunded and understaffed for almost a year before it was able to accept referrals. With impending cuts from the federal government and the changing mindset from federal officials regarding developmental disabilities, what is OPWDD doing to ensure that funding is and will continue to be available for cross-systems programs and access to those programs for New York State residents, particularly rural residents in New York State?
Yeah, so an easy one from Jennifer. And I don't mean to make light of it, right? The federal cuts coming and the one big beautiful bill and the changes that it includes are absolutely terrifying. And I won't pretend that they aren't, right, or that it doesn't keep me up at night. So the changes currently on the federal side are not a direct impact to disability services at this time. We, I think, have the benefit of being a pretty bipartisan service system, and at least from the state legislature, get a lot of support across the board in terms of making sure that these services are available. We had bipartisan support for a COLA for this field, right? I get bipartisan outreach and support all the time in the state. But that being said, there's a projected $14 billion loss in Medicaid coming to New York, which will absolutely impact health and hospital systems. And we know that people with developmental disabilities rely on Medicaid providers in those health and hospital systems for basic preventive care, dental care, health care, hospital care. So it will be 100% felt in New York. The state, no matter what sort of fiscal state it's in, can't make up $14 billion of annual loss of Medicaid. So we will, as a state, need to figure out how to address and react to that loss of funding. So far, I will say that there has been absolutely no chipping away at our service system. In the last executive budget, we had a $25 million investment specific for healthcare for people with developmental disabilities that we just issued an RFP last week to spend. This is a governor and administration and a leadership team here at the agency that is 100% committed to this field and this system and not letting the federal government take away vital resources for anyone. So will there come a time where we need to think about where we can save some money? There absolutely will be. But maintaining services, particularly for those who are the most complex, who have dual diagnoses, who find themselves at the point of crisis, right? That is a population within the disability community that everyone is absolutely committing to, not just maintaining, but to continuing to build capacity to serve. We have a number of ongoing projects with the Office of Mental Health and Department of Health at really trying to do a better job of supporting those highest need people with disabilities in the system. So, is there a plan in place about how to find additional money? I do not have a plan, but you do have commitment from both agency leadership and from the governor's office. I think that's really all that I can say. And I'm sorry that Jake had to hang up, because this would be a great time for him to chime in on behalf of the legislature.
Thank you.
Anyone else from OPWDD have anything to add? Okay. All right, great. Thanks a lot, Jennifer. Our last ambassador of the day is Steve Gania. Steve, if you can unmute and pose your wonderful question.
Yes. Good morning, Commissioner. Mine's a little tougher question because it's dealing with solutions. And the question is, what are the solutions to the various roadblocks that children and families face for receiving services that you believe are there? And the second one is, what is being done to ensure children that aren't left in crisis without the help they need and the care they need?
Well, leave it to Steve to end with a hard question. So Steve is every time I go somewhere where there's a family member, Steve ends up there. So Steve is one of the most outstanding family advocates in the system, and does a tremendous job working particularly with youth and at-risk youth. So I appreciate where the question's coming from. I have outlined already a lot of the places where we do try very hard to push supports in, particularly for children. Our family support services really are highly focused on making sure that there are sort of those safety net services out there, those lighter touch services for children. We've done a ton of work with the Office of Mental Health, and I know that that doesn't cover every child in crisis, right? But what we have seen both at OPWDD and in the Office of Mental Health, that the sort of fastest growing group of people that are hard and harder and becoming harder to serve are those children that have both a developmental disability, typically autism, but not always, and a mental health diagnosis. And so both OPWDD and OPWDD find ourselves struggling with those, particularly children with dual diagnoses, because we have half of the specialty and then the other agency has half of the specialty, right? So we have been working very hard to collaborate. Both agencies build them together so that there's not that gap created, particularly for children with dual diagnoses. We've been doing a lot of piloting work with OMH, and the Office of Mental Health had a lot of money to invest. They saw the importance in investing that money in the area of dual diagnosis. So they have been incredible partners with us to work to develop these new models that are intended for people that have both a developmental disability and a mental health diagnosis. And specifically to keep those children at home, right? So those new programs, and we're opening them in each region of the state, are really focused on keeping children at home and sort of mitigating the crisis level, or if that child finds themselves in a hospital or in a mental health residential program, to step them back down and bring them back into the community. So there are other examples like that, right? But it requires agencies to work together so that those gaps aren't exacerbated. And I've been in and around this agency for 15 years. This is the most closely aligned I have ever seen the Office of Mental Health, OPWDD, the Office of Children and Family Services, the Department of Health. This is the most collaborative I've seen these agencies work together. And I think it's because all of us have reached the same conclusion, which is that you can't successfully serve particularly children in just one system, because no child fits neatly into that bucket. So doing a lot of work on that collaboration. But Alexis or Rachel, please chime in with the important parts I forgot.
I was just going to add, I think we might have some of the ideas of what the potential solutions could be, but it is so important for all of us to sit around the table together and discuss those solutions as one, instead of at the different tables, and just putting a plug out there that, we have the Developmental Disabilities Advisory Council, and that there is one subset that's specifically focused on children. And so if anybody around this table is not already engaged with that committee and that council, that is a great place for these conversations to happen. That reports out to the broader Developmental Disability Advisory Committee on a quarterly basis, where we understand what the formal recommendations are being made to our service system, the service system that we take pride and ownership in to serve all of you as customers, but also, this service system that's yours, that you all take pride in as well. So just wanted to add that it's not just us, but it is a collaborative conversation and networking together where we're coming up with those solutions as one, instead of, just the state agencies. Like, we have to hear from you all as well. You are the experts of your own situations, and we only know so much.
Thank you so much. I know that Katrina wanted, if possible, if we can add another layer to that. Katrina was wondering about, and when we were talking about these gaps and the need to not be so siloed, which is something we do very well in New York State. What happens with those high need families that are still dealing with a developmental disability with a comorbidity, but yet they haven't met the criteria for OPWDD, but yet if they find themselves in crisis, we know that they still need to be served, taking into consideration both diagnoses.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a perfect example of one of those gaps, right? We as a service system try to provide the right supports and services in a very individualized way for people from a very early age all the way through death. And if you don't meet the eligibility criteria for our system, then you find yourself needing to fit into a different one. That's really where we would expect outreach to the Department of Health. We have a chief disability officer for the first time in a long time in New York State government who's very focused on identifying additional communities of people with disabilities that don't fit neatly into one of these other service systems. So that, I don't have an answer, Katrina, but you highlight exactly the type of conversation that we have been engaging in with this administration and really trying to minimize those lines for people.
Thank you. I was just wondering because there's a family that she has a son that's visually impaired and a younger son that has autism, and they're both considered high functioning, so they aren't eligible for OBWDD services. So she ends up navigating all of the entire like care on her own alongside with her family, but no like service providers besides like supports from the visually impaired community, but he still needs like someone to be there to support him, to be like his guide besides um his mobility instructor.
Yeah, that sounds really hard. I know that families go through a lot, supporting loved ones, particularly when that loved one doesn't fit neatly into one of the definitions, right? And I don't have advice beyond the service system that we oversee. I don't know if anyone else on the call does, but we can certainly try to see if we can connect them with the right entity.
Thank you.
Okay, so Steve was our last ambassador. And I really thank all of you for coming today. This was very informative. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you to Alexis and Rachel and to Senator Fahy's office. I want to kick it back over to Paige so that we can close.
Thanks, Kim. And again, thank you, Commissioner, and everyone else. And thanks to the ambassadors who were willing to share their experiences and their stories to be able to help shape policies. Our motto is nothing about us without us. And these are the us that are here to help you, Commissioner, in making policies that are impacting our families and our young people. So everyone, thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you for our next town hall, which is on Friday. It's the Mental Health and Substance Use Disorder Town Hall with commissioners and legislators from that system. Thanks again, and we look forward to working with you in the future, Commissioner.
I do too. Thank you so much for inviting